If we look at Forrest Gump, does he have defining moments?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. So Forrest, yeah, he experiences a moment that doesn't transform his inner nature. His inner nature is constant. He's an innocent. That's his genius. But when the movie opens, he's an innocent alone. And the moment that he climbs onto the school bus and meets Jenny defines his life. His life will never be the same after that moment that he climbs onto the school bus. And in fact, there's dialogue in the film where he says, I can't quote it, but it's funny what a person remembers. I don't remember my first pair of shoes, etc. He says, but I do remember the first time I heard the sweetest voice in the whole wide world. And he meets Jenny on the bus. She invites him to sit beside her. And he says in very defining moment language, from that moment on, we was like peas and carrots. So he experiences a moment that defines him, even though it doesn't redefine his inner nature. It defines his experience of life. I think that when Forrest finds out he's got a son, that is a transforming moment. It redirects the course of his life. His life will now be about caring for little Forrest. And I think that Jenny's death is also probably a defining moment for him because his life, at least as told in the movie, is bookended by meeting Jenny and then losing Jenny. But receiving from her the gift of his son, and that then will define the rest of Forrest's life. So defining moments don't always transform, say, the nature of a person, but they can still change the course of their lives. I think we see that with Jack in Titanic. Jack is not a character who really has a big need to grow and change. Rose definitely needs to be transformed. When we meet Rose, she's ready to leap off the back of the ship to her death. By the time the movie's done, Rose is all about surviving. So she has been transformed. Jack is still kind of the same guy. But I think we could say that meeting Rose is a defining moment for Jack. And if he had not met her, certainly those 3 or 4 days of the voyage would have been different. And while that sounds like a short period of time, that was his whole life. That was all the life he had left. He might also say winning that card game that got him the ticket on Titanic would also be a defining event in his life.
Yeah, so with Forrest Gump, it seems as if there were maybe stronger, in some sense, turning point, like in terms of the defining moments that changed a lot of the people. Because if you look at Lieutenant Dan, he was so angry, he was so competitive, he had so much vengeance. And then toward the end, when you see him at the wedding, he's a different person. He's transformed.
Yes. So for Lieutenant Dan, his life was on a clear course toward what he thought was his destiny, which was to die heroically in battle, which that was what his family did. And Forrest intervened and pulled him out of danger and disrupted the course that Lieutenant Dan thought his life was supposed to be on. So that was a moment that redefined Lieutenant Dan's life in a way Lieutenant Dan despised. And then Lieutenant Dan was on that course of being completely unhappy with a life that he saw as he's been cheated. So all he's got now is just emptiness until he is on the shrimping boat in the middle of the hurricane with Forrest, And he climbs up the mast in the middle of that hurricane and has a screaming match with God over his destiny. And Forrest tells us that in that moment, he believes that God and Lieutenant Dan somehow came to peace with each other. And Lieutenant Dan is a different person after that, which makes possible Lieutenant Dan showing up at the wedding. Now he's got new legs, he has a wife, and he's no longer the bitter person. He's been made whole. And within the movie, we have the two pivot points. The rescue, which denied him his destiny, and then the confrontation between Lieutenant Dan and God in the midst of a hurricane, which then makes his growth possible. So we can only understand Lieutenant Dan's character arc through those two pivot points.
And then with Jenny, here she recommends for Forrest, to run from the bullies. But really that's a metaphor for what she'd been doing all her life. And so we don't see her toward the end until, she comes back and she's changed, but we just know that she was a runner herself, and then she's much different.
Yes, and in many ways, the moment that made it possible for her to come home happened off screen. We understand, well, we see her hit bottom when she climbs up on that railing of a balcony at a New Year's Eve party, I think. And so we understand that either we've seen a defining moment or that she is in the zone where those things kind of happen. Her return to Forrest is evidence that she has had this transformative kind of experience. But I think it shows us that defining moments can be if we're talking about playing cards, they can be played in different ways. They can be played on screen, off screen, through just a character recounting something that happened, or we end up with more defining moments than we can actually use. It's one of my frustrations. I was working today on my next feature screenplay, and the last 2 pages after fade out are a nice little dialogue scene that tells the story of my main character's defining moment. And I know that that's going to fall out of the script because it doesn't need to be in there. But I needed to know what that moment was so that I could write the rest of what that character says and does. So that even when these defining moments don't end up on screen, they still enrich my understanding. This is also something that can be really valuable for actors, for them to understand not only that this is true of my character, but why this is true of my character. So I'll tell a story out of school. When I worked at Warner Brothers in the script department, the movie Twister started shooting before the script was fully written. And producer Ian Bryce called me up and said, "Can you send a script typist to Oklahoma to work with the writer as he finishes writing this movie while we shoot it?" And I said, "That sounds like too much fun. I'll send myself." So I was on a plane the next day to Oklahoma City, and I ended up out in the middle of a farm field with 300 vehicles and making this big tornado action movie. Helen Hunt plays a meteorologist who's chasing tornadoes obsessively for reasons that no one knew at the moment, because that scene hadn't been written yet. So she's having to go out and she's trying to put this scientific instrument, place it in the path of a tornado so it'll be sucked up and they'll learn all kinds of things about tornadoes. She's putting her life at risk, putting her relationships at risk, And at some point, they know, we'll write the scene for her backstory, the defining moment that made her a tornado hunter. But they didn't need to film that for several weeks into the future. And they didn't seem to take into account that Helen Hunt, as an actor, would like to know why she's doing all these things. Eventually, they came up with what we would describe as a defining moment, a moment from her childhood when she experienced a killer tornado, and that birthed in her the dream that she would someday make the world safer by getting people more advance warning of tornadoes. My argument is it would have been a real service to Helen Hunt as an actor to know what that was while she was chasing those tornadoes. And that I'll just use as a metaphor for the way that an understanding of defining moments can be of use and of value to actors, certainly, directors, editors, cinematographers, everyone. You know, I described the way Michael Corleone is in the bathroom in that pivotal defining moment for The Godfather. You can see evidence that everyone on the team appreciated what that moment meant for that character and for the film. The production designer had to design 3 sets of doors for the character to walk through. The cinematographer had to arrange the shot that way. The editor, the composer had to all support that moment, not cut past it because, oh my gosh, how much time are we spending in this bathroom? Nothing's going on in here. But everybody recognized that, yes, this is where Michael is going through this metamorphosis. And so we have to support and dramatize all of the interaction that is happening outside of our view. Somehow we have to make that visible on the screen. And the entire team understood, intuitively or not, what a defining moment that was, and built an entire film around that moment.
We've talked a lot about defining moments in drama, but in comedy as well. I mean, we could think of so many John Hughes films that had great defining moments, whether it was 16 Candles or Home Alone or something. I mean, there's just, is there a difference in the way that a comedic defining moment is done?
You know, I think I am not a comedy writer. It just gives me terrible anxiety to think about exchanging money for laughs. And I have friends who specialize in comedy. I think it's a gift that I don't have. But to the extent that I understand comedy, comedy works a lot like drama, except it's just funny. You know, we laugh. So when a character is pursuing a goal, they pursue it to absurd lengths in a way that you wouldn't do in a drama. But the character arcs still often have to do with character transformation. I think that the deepest and like most satisfying comedies really are dramas with laughs. And so I think that these defining moments absolutely exist. You might need a defining moment to help us understand why a character would do the absurd things that they do. But so that, you know, they may be of a different quality. When I brainstorm my 20 possibilities, I'm going to pick a different defining moment in a comedy than I am in a gritty drama, just for tone. But it's still performing those functions of either explaining why the hero wants what they want, why they need to grow and change the way they need to, or that's showing us the transformation as it unfolds step by step.